What? Frothis wide, shimmering eyes blinked in confusion as he reread the message. His 4 nimble fingers tapped the holographic screen, enlarging the details of the text. The invitation was clear, yet utterly baffling. "You want us to rest with the humans?" Frothis questioned, his voice full of disbelief as he turned to his fellow crew members, their forms glowing faintly under the sterile lights of the command room. Plar, the crew's engineer, was equally confused. Rest? How is that a part of any productive mission? Humans are supposed to be known for their relentless work ethic. This doesn't make sense. Frothis nodded, his mind racing. The crew of the Zervax had always been known for their meticulous planning and efficient work schedules, something that was held in high regard among their species. Every cycle was allocated carefully, work, training, and regeneration periods, all scientifically optimized. There was no room for wasted time, no room for what the humans called downtime. Captain Donovan, the human leading their joint operation, had sent the message directly. "Take a day off with us. We're planning a day off this cycle. Come join us." Talar's pale tendrils twitched in frustration. What even is a day off? I've been through every archive we have on human work structures, and nowhere does it mention anything of this. Practice. Frothis leaned back in his chair, his mind swirling with questions. He had spent many cycles observing human behavior during their shared missions, often finding them strange. Their ability to endure long, grueling work periods without complaint was impressive. Yet, just as often, they would insist on taking these so-called breaks, claiming it helped them recharge. Recharge, but without any form of stasis or regeneration pod? Frothis had once asked. "Exactly," Donovan had said with a laugh. "You'll see, it's all about mental recovery, a break from the grind. Trust me, you'll feel better after a day off." But now, standing before the invitation, Frothis and the rest of the crew weren't sure what to expect. The aliens of Zervax had always adhered to strict principles of work and rest cycles. Leisure, in their world, meant regulated time in rejuvenation chambers or meditative programs, not whatever this was. Still, their curiosity won out. "All right," Frothis finally spoke, his voice steady. "Let's accept the invitation. If this is some kind of human tradition, we should at least try to understand it. Perhaps there's something we can learn from their unorthodox methods." Kolarath, the security officer, grunted. "I'll go, but if this turns out to be some elaborate endurance test, I'm ready to opt out. The humans are always pushing themselves to strange limits." With the decision made, Frothis sent a confirmation back to Captain Donovan. His mind was still uneasy. A day off could be some form of subtle training disguised as leisure, or maybe it was a cultural quirk that hadn't been fully documented. Either way, they were about to experience something completely alien to their way of life. The day arrived quickly. Frothis and his team stood at the edge of the clearing, observing as the humans busily set up their day-off activities. The setting was peaceful, a large park surrounded by trees, with a wide-open sky above. Humans milled about, chatting casually, some stretching, others preparing what appeared to be recreational equipment. "I still don't understand," Talar muttered, her tendrils twitching slightly as she watched a group of humans throw a spherical object back and forth. "What exactly are we supposed to do?" Captain Donovan, standing nearby, overheard and laughed. "You're supposed to relax. It's a simple day out. No work, no deadlines, just a chance to unwind." "Unwind?" Kolarath asked, his heavy brow furrowed. "We conserve energy through stasis or controlled rest periods. This seems inefficient." Donovan grinned. "It's not about efficiency, it's about clearing the mind, letting go of stress. Trust me, by the end of the day, you'll feel like a new person." Frothis exchanged a glance with his crew. The concept of letting go of stress was foreign to them. Their mental discipline had been trained over cycles, and any disruption to that order was seen as a weakness. Still, they had agreed to experience this human custom, and experience it they would. The first activity was something Donovan called a walk. Simple enough, or so the aliens thought. As they followed the humans along a winding path through the park, Frothis noticed how the humans moved casually, talking and laughing as they walked. The Zervax crew, meanwhile, kept their formation tight, their posture rigid. "This is relaxing?" Frothis asked, turning to Donovan. "Absolutely," Donovan replied. Just being out here, breathing fresh air, not worrying about anything, it's perfect. The crew tried to mimic the humans' relaxed pace, but it felt unnatural. Their bodies were accustomed to either purposeful action or complete rest. This in-between state was disorienting. Still, they continued, trying to enjoy the experience. After the walk, the humans led them to an open field where something called recreational sports was about to take place. The aliens watched as the humans divided into teams and began a game involving kicking a ball across the grass. It looked simple enough, and Farathis assumed it was a basic coordination exercise. "Let's join in," Donovan said, handing Farathis a ball. "Just for fun." Farathis hesitated, but accepted the challenge. The Zervax team joined one side, trying to emulate the humans' movements. At first, the game seemed straightforward, but as the pace increased, so did the complexity. The humans moved with surprising speed and agility, their laughter echoing across the field. For the aliens, however, the game quickly became physically taxing. "This is rest?" Kolorath panted, already feeling the strain in his muscles. Donovan, running past, shot him a grin. "It's part of it, you'll see." After several rounds, the Zervax crew was noticeably winded, but the humans were still full of energy. The ball game, it seemed, was only the beginning. Next came something called yoga. As the crew gathered on mats provided by the humans, Farathis noted how different this activity seemed from the previous ones. The humans began stretching into various poses, breathing deeply and moving slowly. This, finally, appeared to be closer to the concept of rest that Farathis understood. But as the session went on, the stretches became more complex, and Farathis realized that even this relaxing activity required an unusual amount of physical effort. His limbs ached as he tried to mimic the poses, his muscles protesting against the strain. By the end of the yoga session, the crew was beginning to feel fatigue setting in. Yet, when they looked over at the humans, they saw only smiles and easy conversations. "How are they not exhausted?" Talar whispered, her tendrils drooping slightly from exertion. "I don't know," Farathis replied, his voice laced with confusion, "but they seem to be enjoying this." The day was far from over. The humans announced the next activity, a light jog followed by swimming. What else could they possibly have planned? Kolorath groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. As the humans began to jog toward the lake, the Zervax team exchanged uneasy glances. What had started as a relaxing day off was quickly turning into a grueling test of endurance, and the humans weren't showing any signs of slowing down. By the time they reached the lake, the Zervax crew was already pushing the limits of their stamina. Farathis could feel his muscles protesting with every step, and the once steady rhythm of his breathing had turned labored. Talar, usually composed and precise, had fallen silent, her tendrils limp with exhaustion. Even Kolorath, known for his physical strength, was visibly struggling to keep up. But the humans? They were still going strong. Captain Donovan led the charge, jogging ahead with effortless strides, his cheerful voice echoing over the group. "All right, time for a quick swim, just a dip to cool off and loosen up the muscles. You all did great during the jog." Farathis stared at the lake ahead, the shimmering water reflecting the mid-afternoon sun. "Cool off? We are on the verge of collapse," he thought, but his pride kept him from voicing it out loud. Instead, he glanced at his crew, who shared his sentiment. None of them were accustomed to this type of rest. Talar wiped the sweat from her brow. "They've been going non-stop. How is this even possible? Their bodies should be hitting the same fatigue thresholds as ours." "I don't understand it either," Farathis muttered, his voice strained. "They've maintained this energy level for hours now." Donovan clapped his hands together, breaking the crew's concentration. "Come on, folks. Water's perfect for recovery. You're gonna feel brand new after this." "Brand new?" Farathis thought in disbelief. At this point, they felt more like they needed a full regenerative cycle in the medical pods than a dip in a lake. But the humans seemed completely unfazed by the day's activities. The crew reluctantly followed the humans into the water. Farathis waded in cautiously, his body tense, unsure how this relaxing swim was supposed to work. Meanwhile, the humans were already diving, splashing and laughing like they hadn't spent the entire day engaging in physically demanding activities. To his surprise, the water was cool and soothing, providing a brief respite from the relentless strain. For a moment, Farathis allowed himself to relax, floating on his back and letting the gentle current carry him. He glanced at his crew. Even Kolarath, who had been grumbling the entire time, seemed to be enjoying this brief moment of calm. Maybe this is finally it, Farathis thought. Maybe this is what they mean by rest. But his hopes were quickly dashed when Donovan swam over, grinning widely. "All right, folks, let's do a quick lap across the lake. It's not far, just to keep the blood flowing." Farathis felt a wave of disbelief crash over him. A lap? His body, already fatigued beyond anything he had experienced in recent cycles, screamed in protest at the idea. But there was no turning back now, not with the humans watching so expectantly. The Zervax crew set off behind the humans, struggling to maintain any semblance of grace in the water. Every stroke felt like lifting a weight that doubled in mass with each movement. By the time they reached the other side of the lake, Farathis was barely holding himself together. Once they emerged from the water, the humans began drying off, their energy still astonishingly high. Farathis and his crew, however, were a different story. Their bodies were trembling with fatigue, their minds unable to process how the humans continued to function at this level of activity. Talar leaned in close to Farathis, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is beyond anything we've trained for. How are they not even slightly fatigued? They've exerted themselves more in this rest day than we do in a full work cycle." Farathis could only shake his head in response. "I don't know. Their endurance, it's unnatural." Kolarath, who had been quietly enduring the day's activities, finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. "This isn't rest. This is some kind of endurance trial. If they keep this up, we won't make it through the day." But the humans weren't finished yet. Donovan called out from across the shore. "We're firing up the grills for a barbecue. It's a perfect way to close out the day. And don't worry, there's more coffee too." The Zervax crew froze at the mention of coffee. They had witnessed what coffee did to humans, how it seemed to ignite an unholy fire of energy in them, pushing their limits even further. The idea of consuming it now, after such an exhausting day, seemed like a death sentence. Farathis exchanged glances with his team. They were at their breaking point, but somehow, the humans were only now reaching the part of the day they considered the most relaxing. As they trudged toward the grilling area, their limbs heavy and their minds reeling, Farathis couldn't shake the feeling that they had severely underestimated just how relentless human endurance truly was. The scent of sizzling meat and vegetables filled the air as the Zervax crew staggered toward the grilling area, their bodies aching from the relentless activities of the day. Despite their exhaustion, their alien senses couldn't help but respond to the rich, smoky aroma of the barbecue, though the sheer volume of food the humans had prepared was overwhelming. Farathis sat down heavily on one of the wooden benches, trying to regain his composure. His muscles throbbed, and his mind was foggy with fatigue. He watched in disbelief as the humans moved about the area with casual ease, chatting animatedly as if the day's physical trials had been nothing more than a light warm-up. Kolarath slumped down beside him, shaking his head. "I don't understand. They're still going." "They've had more than enough physical exertion for one cycle," Talar added, her voice flat with exhaustion. "How is this not affecting them the way it affects us?" Farathis didn't have an answer. What he did know was that the humans were defying everything the Zervax had learned about physical limits. He had thought their joint operations would reveal new insights into human technology or tactics, but today had shown him something far more unexpected. The humans possessed a level of endurance that bordered on the impossible. "Food's ready," Captain Donovan called out with a grin, holding up a massive plate piled high with grilled meats, vegetables, and various side dishes. "Come on over, you all need to refuel after a day like this." Refuel? Farathis blinked. They needed more than food. They needed stasis chambers, regeneration pods, and about 3 cycles of uninterrupted rest. Still, the crew reluctantly made their way to the food line, if only to avoid appearing weak in front of the humans. As they filled their plates, they couldn't help but notice the sheer amount of food the humans were consuming. The energy expenditure from the day's activities apparently hadn't diminished their appetites in the slightest. Farathis glanced down at his own plate, The portion sizes the humans had given them seemed excessive, but he forced himself to eat, hoping it might provide some much-needed energy. Humans take food very seriously, Kolarath muttered between bites, his voice tinged with both admiration and disbelief. They see it as part of their recovery. Frothis nodded, trying to focus on the meal. Maybe this is the key. They eat a lot. Perhaps it's what sustains their endurance. But even as he tried to reason it out, his body continued to rebel against him. Every movement was a struggle. Every bite felt like it took more effort than it should. He was on the verge of collapse, and yet Donovan was still going strong. "Hey, after we eat," Donovan said, leaning across the table with an eager grin, "we're thinking of playing a round of volleyball. It's a fun way to end the day. You in?" Frothis' fork clattered onto his plate as he stared at Donovan in disbelief. Volleyball? They had already run, swum, walked, and stretched their bodies beyond anything the Zervax had trained for, and now Donovan wanted them to participate in yet another physically demanding activity. Kolarath spoke up first, his voice a low growl. "I'm going to have to decline. My body is no longer functioning at its optimal capacity." Talar shook her head as well. "I agree. We've reached the limits of our endurance. I don't think we can continue." Frothis knew they couldn't push any further. The crew was on the edge of collapse, and asking them to engage in yet another physical trial would be risking serious injury. Yet the humans, Donovan and the others, looked ready and eager to continue as if the day had barely begun. "I think we'll sit this one out," Frothis said carefully, not wanting to offend their human hosts. "Our species doesn't recover in the same way yours does. We need time to, as you say, recharge." Donovan looked surprised, but he didn't press the issue. "No worries. We'll play a quick game, and you can just relax and watch. Maybe next time you'll join in." Frothis managed a nod, though in his mind, there was no way his crew could ever handle another day off like this. He watched as the humans set up the volleyball net, their energy undiminished, their laughter still ringing through the air. It was as if the day's exhausting activities had only served to make them more energized. Talar, seated beside him, sighed deeply. "I thought this was supposed to be a day of rest, but they've done nothing but push their bodies further than any logical limit." "It's not just physical," Frothis said, rubbing his temples as he tried to process the day. "They have a resilience that goes beyond biology. It's mental, too. Somehow, they find strength in these activities. They seem to thrive on it." Kolarath grunted. "It's unnatural. No species should be able to endure this kind of strain for so long." The crew sat in silence as they watched the humans play volleyball, their movements still quick and graceful, their laughter echoing across the field. What had begun as a day meant to rest had turned into a lesson in human endurance, a challenge that had pushed the Zervax far beyond their comfort zone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the field, Frothis reflected on the day. They had learned something valuable, not about human technology or warfare, but about the sheer power of human will. The humans' ability to push themselves to find joy in physical exertion was unlike anything the Zervax had ever encountered. And as they sat there, watching the humans wind down their final game, Frothis couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect. The humans were more than just resilient, they were unstoppable. As dusk settled in, the humans finally finished their volleyball game. The Zervax crew, utterly drained, could only watch in quiet disbelief as the humans celebrated their victory, still showing no signs of exhaustion. Captain Donovan, in particular, seemed even more energized than before, clapping his teammates on the back and shouting, "Great game, everyone!" Frothis sat at the edge of the field, his body heavy with fatigue, his mind struggling to comprehend how the humans had made it through the day. His team, sitting beside him, was in no better condition. Talar rested with her eyes half closed, too tired to speak. Kolarath had been silent for the last hour, his massive frame slumped as if all strength had left him. They had endured more in one rest day than they had in their most rigorous training cycles. Captain Donovan approached the Zervax team with a broad grin, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Well, that was a great day, wasn't it? I know you didn't join us for the volleyball, but I hope you at least had fun watching." He gestured toward the food tables. "Feel free to grab some more food if you're hungry. We've got plenty left." Frothis could barely manage a response. His entire body ached, and the idea of consuming more food, let alone engaging in any more activity, was impossible to fathom. Yet Donovan seemed genuinely happy, even concerned that they hadn't been able to fully enjoy the day. "You humans," Frothis began, choosing his words carefully. "You don't stop, you never tire. How do you do it?" Donovan tilted his head, his expression shifting to one of curiosity. "What do you mean?" Frothis gestured weakly to the humans, who were now starting to clean up the field, still moving as if the day had just begun. "We have reached our limits. We are trained, we are disciplined, but you just keep going. How can you possibly maintain this level of energy?" Donovan laughed, though it wasn't out of mockery. "Ah, I see what you're saying." He sat down next to Frothis, his eyes thoughtful. "Honestly, I think it's just in our nature. We push ourselves. We've always been that way. Some people might call it stubbornness, others might call it determination. But for us, a day like this is just fun. It's how we relax." "Fun?" Colerath's voice was hoarse, his disbelief evident. This is what you call relaxing?" Donovan grinned. "Yeah, pretty much. We like to stay active. It clears the mind, helps us focus, and well, we love a good challenge." Talar, barely able to lift her head, muttered, "This was no challenge. This was torture." Donovan chuckled. "I guess it's all about perspective. For us, sitting around doing nothing feels like a waste. We'd rather be out here, pushing ourselves, getting the most out of every day. That's how we recharge." Frothis shook his head in disbelief. "But you've done more in one cycle than we would in several training periods. How do you not feel the fatigue?" Donovan thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I guess we do feel it, but we don't let it stop us. There's always more we can do, and we kind of thrive on that feeling. When you push through the exhaustion, when you keep going, even when your body's telling you to stop, there's something powerful in that." Powerful. That word echoed in Frothis' mind. He had never considered that pushing beyond physical limits could be a source of strength rather than a detriment. The Zirvacs were a disciplined species, valuing precision and efficiency, but the humans seemed to find strength in chaos, in pushing themselves to the very edge, and sometimes beyond. The final rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the field. The humans were still talking, still moving, still full of energy. Frothis realized that despite everything, despite their overwhelming physical abilities, there was something more to them. Something deeper. They don't just endure, he thought. They refuse to be stopped. As the humans continued cleaning up, Captain Donovan stood and clapped his hands. "All right, everyone, time to head back. We'll rest up tonight, and tomorrow we'll hit the next project full force." Frothis froze at the mention of tomorrow. His mind spun at the thought of enduring another day like this. He exchanged glances with his crew, all of whom seemed equally horrified. "Tomorrow?" Colerath croaked, his voice barely audible. "You mean another day like this?" Donovan smiled warmly, misinterpreting the Zirvax's reaction as excitement. "Yep, tomorrow's another day. But don't worry, we'll take it easy in the morning. Maybe just a short hike before we get to work." Frothis opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. There was no point. These humans were unstoppable. What they considered a day off had nearly brought his entire crew to their knees, and yet they were eager for more. As the humans gathered their things, Frothis leaned back, staring up at the darkening sky. He had learned something today, something profound about the species he had thought he understood. It wasn't just their physical endurance that made them formidable. It was their mindset. Their unyielding drive, their relentless pursuit of pushing past limits was what truly set them apart. Colerath, still slumped beside him, groaned. "We won't survive another day like this." Lar, her voice barely a whisper, agreed. "If we stay, they'll run us into the ground." Frothis remained silent for a long moment, his mind racing. Finally he spoke, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "We'll survive, but we'll never look at them the same way again." As the humans cheerfully packed up, ready for the next day, Frothis realized one undeniable truth. The Zirvacs had met many powerful species across the galaxy, but none like the humans. They were truly unstoppable.